Hi, this is Reed Jacobs with Faith and Hope Hospice, bringing you another COVID conversation. Today we're going to be discussing children and COVID-19. Joining us today is Karrie Filios, a children's grief specialist and bereavement counselor. Welcome, Karrie. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do?
Thanks, Reed. I have been working in grief and loss for 20 years now. By training, I'm a marriage and family therapist and got involved doing grief work, actually volunteering at a children's grief camp 20 years ago, and fell in love with that and started working at a children's grief support center after uh, the camp, and then started my own children's grief program, which I've been doing about 13 years now. And I also am the bereavement services manager for a local hospice.
So to get us started, and we'll start kind of broad and kind of narrow down from there, but what would you say is the most challenging thing right now for kids in understanding COVID and the changes it's causing?
Well, it's not just for kids, it's for everybody. It's that our assumptive world has been completely shattered, which is what normally happens in grief anyway, that everything we knew to be true and safe about the world is no longer. So that's going on for not just children, but for their adult caregivers. Again, follows the natural path of what grief does anyway. So it's that lack of feeling safe, lack of normalcy, all of those kind of things are wreaking havoc on everyone right now. And kids are much more susceptible to picking up on energy. And so they pick up on the energy of the adults around them, which right now everybody's anxieties are pretty high, which then increases a child's anxiety.
Yeah, they seem to pick up on what the adults around them are expressing.
Well, it's more about what the adults aren't expressing. Oftentimes, adults don't share with children what's going on, but the kids pick up that there's something wrong. They pick up on the anxiety that's in the room. Um, and a lot of times they think it's about them because they're very egocentric.
Hmm. Yeah, it's like uh, the world still very much revolves around them, and it's not really coming from a place of arrogance or superiority. It's just how a kid's brain works.
Their developmental place where they're at. That's another thing, how COVID is impacting them, is they don't get, well, why can't I go out and play? Why can't I do this? Because the world does revolve around me and I should be able to do that. But as we're watching adults, they're doing the same thing. So adults are really mirroring what kids are doing with that, thinking that it evolves around me, and having a really hard time with following rules and adapting to all the changes that are going on around us.
Yeah, and kids tend to start to act out or misbehave or get in trouble when there's a lot of stress. And that's especially true when a child is grieving the death of someone they love or someone who is close to them.
Right. What we have to kind of put in context with COVID is it's creating loss on every level possible. So not just talking about death, but a loss of being able to see my friends, a loss of going to school, a loss of maybe financial in the home. Maybe there's a loss of food. There's a loss of access to services that they needed. So loss is all around us right now. And so, yeah, there's going to be a lot of anxiety that's being created because of all the losses that they're being exposed to.
Hmm. Yeah, it's not just one thing. It's not just COVID. It's not just a death. It's all these building up and all layering up and building up on one another.
It's very compounded. And there's mixed with a lot of disenfranchised grief. There's a lot of ambiguous loss going on. Um, so it's all kind of commingled, and you can't really say one is trumping the other one. In a moment it might be, but it's all creating a lot of tension and anxiety. And we see the sadness and the depressive pieces of it too.
Yeah, and it becomes too much built up for a child to just cope with all at once. And so it's natural for a kid to kind of just focus on one thing at a time. Um, I know that a lot of times when children are grieving a death, um, they will talk to an adult, or they will be expressing emotions, sadness, or something around the death itself. And after a few minutes, they'll kind of be done with that, and then may go off and play. And then uh, sometime later, they may come back to an adult with more questions. Um, but that kind of, it almost seems like turning it off and on. That's kind of normal for kids.
Right. They don't sit in grief like adults do. We tend, as adults, we tend to perseverate. We don't just kind of feel something and move through it. We have to wallow in it. We have to pick it apart. We have to do all this kind of stuff that can keep us kind of stuck. Where children, they feel something, they express it, and they move on. And sometimes they don't even know what they're feeling. They don't understand where that feeling is coming from, and so you're seeing the behavior. So that may be the acting out. That might be maybe they're starting a fight. Maybe they're being irritable. Maybe they're being combative, or maybe they're crying. But maybe, for whatever reason, but they usually don't articulate saying, "Oh, well, this is because of this." And so for adults, that's what they're expecting their child to do. So they'll sit down and ask them, "So how do you feel? What's going on for you?" They don't know how to answer that question because they're being inundated with all these different emotions all at once. They have no idea what's going on within them. So to ask them, "How do I feel?" I don't know what the answer for that is. I don't know what the right answer. What do you want from me? So then they get more frustrated. And the adults get frustrated because they expect them to be mini us. And we're going to sit down and talk about it. And talking it through makes us feel better. Not necessarily for a child. Do we still need to be present to them and still ask them about how they're doing and what's going on? Absolutely. But we need to not force them to sit there and sit in it and talk about it until we feel better about it. They will come, they will make a statement. Sometimes it could be something like, "Well, why couldn't you have died instead of them?" Well, that's normal for a child. It's nothing personal, but they're just trying to make sense of. Or they may be, "Why can't I go out and play? Why do I have to sit in here?" It's just they're expressing their frustration or their angst about not being able to do something they want. And then they'll go out and do something else. I had a child who we were expecting this, being told that her father had just died, wailed and screamed. We were expecting that, and let her mom just hold her through that. Wasn't asking, wasn't talking the whole time, just allowed that expression of the emotion. About 5, 7 minutes later, she got up and went playing on the swings, because it was just too intense to sit in that, but she just needed to express that. Doesn't mean that that's the only time she's ever going to need to scream and yell and cry. It just means they do this much better. They're more fluid about it than we are as adults.
Yeah, we could learn a lot from them.
They could have a lot to teach us about how to handle grief.
So just sitting down with a kid and saying, "Let's talk about it," maybe not the best idea. How would you recommend an adult engage with a child to talk about grief for COVID?
I usually engage them initially with playing a game, offering to just sit down and play a game so that you're not putting them on the spot and they see that you're not expecting anything of them. And then we can, from the game, maybe start talking about things. Like I like to start with Uno because it's about colors. And I'll ask, "So maybe it was the dad that died. Did your dad have a favorite color? What was his favorite color?" So I'll start engaging with a little memory work first to just kind of open that up so that they feel comfortable that it's okay to talk about them, you know? And then we'll see where that goes. And it may lead to them talking about missing them, or how has life changed since dad has died? What's different in your household since COVID? But I don't usually just jump right in there, because even if they know me, we still need to do that rapport building, kind of make them not feel like they're going to be on the spot, that I'm going to grill them or, interrogate them.
Yeah, and I know in a previous conversation you and I had, um, we were telling me about how children can process grief through play. So you were saying if an adult is going to engage a child like this, it doesn't need to just be the adult watching the child play. It needs to be the adult playing along with the child.
If the child invites you in, but you don't just want to sit back and observe, because again, then you're putting them on this spot and they feel like they're being interrogated or, I'm being evaluated. You want to be at their level. So if they're sitting on the floor, you sit on the floor. If they're sitting at the desk, you ask if you can sit next to them. You try to meet their height. You don't want to be, I'm a tall person, but considering a child, I'm really tall. So I will get on my knees or I'll sit on the floor and they'll be in a chair so that they can be above me so that it's not so intimidating for them. And I'll ask, what would you like to do now? And they'll say, maybe I want to color, or maybe I want to play cards. Okay, would you like me to do that with you? Giving them control. That's a big thing that happens for children in grief. It just in life in general for them, their lack of control. They have so little control over their lives. And then when you're feeling the emotion and there's no control over that, the more we can give them a sense of control, and this is true for adults as well, the more they have a sense of control, the more relaxed the anxiety decreases. So if they get to tell an adult, yes, I want you to do this, or no, I don't, or they direct me on what I need to do, it really helps them feel some mastery and less intimidated. So that's usually how we kind of start that out, of asking them what they would like us to do. And then they'll say, I want you to draw this picture, or I want you to do this, or I want you to go get that. Okay, let me go get that. So it's really about the child directing us.
Yeah, and having that piece of control when everything feels so out of control can be really helpful.
Right. And grief is the ultimate, a death loss is the ultimate out of control, right?
Hmm.
There's
Yeah.
nothing that can fix that.
Yeah. So, and you were mentioning coloring and drawing, that being a good tool. And again, in another previous conversation, you were telling me about when a child shows you their drawing, um, it's good not to try to interpret it, to kind of let them tell you what the picture is or whatever they've drawn, what it is.
Right. We are not, unless you're an art therapists interpret. We are not trained art therapists. We do expressive arts, very different um, concepts. Um, and so our job is not to interpret, but to hear the story. So it's more about the narrative of what they've created. So we're not trying to make meaning out of what they've done. That's for them to decide, and if they want to share that with us. So we'll ask them, would you like to tell me about your picture? Well, no. Okay, well, I see that there's a yellow circle over here. I see that there's um, black lines going straight up, and we're not trying to say what we think the black line is, because that's me making an assumption about what I think their picture is. Not mine to make an assumption about. It's theirs to tell me what is there or what isn't there. I will acknowledge what's observable. So shapes and colors are observable. They don't have meanings, right? So I comment that there's this or that. And by acknowledging everything I see on the page, it lets them see that I really did pay attention to what's on their page. And it gives them the opportunity, if they want to tell me what that circle is or what those black lines were. Oftentimes they do, and sometimes they don't. We have to trust that whatever they needed to create and express, they were able to. We don't force them to talk about it. If they don't want to share it, they don't have to. But it's really important for us to validate what they created, what they did. And again, we don't praise. We don't say, "Oh, that's a great picture," or any, because that's ascribing also judgment. So if you had 3 kids sitting there and you said, "Oh, what a pretty picture," and I said that to you, but the other 2 I didn't say that to, well, how is that? So again, and we don't want to insinuate that one is better than the other. Someone's pain is worse than another's, or that we're judging their work. So we really stay away from any of those types of adjectives. We just say, wow, you spent a lot of time working on this, or thank you for taking the time to do that. You used a lot of colors, you know, oh, the paper looks very jagged, you know, just what's observable without having judgment or meaning or interpretation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know I have more than once embarrassed myself when uh, looking at a kid's drawing and like, oh, what a pretty elephant. Um, that's a flower. Sorry.
Right. Well, if you think about adults, especially when I work with adults and I ask them to do an art project that involves drawing or something for grief, and they panic because they automatically, first thing comes out of their mouth, I'm not a very good drawer. I'm not artistic. Where does that come from? It's judging the work instead of just allowing the process to happen and enjoying the fact of creating. We shut that down. So it's much harder to get adults to engage in this than it is for kids, um, because of that fact that they think that it's going to be somehow judged about. It has to have, if I don't feel that it's a worthy piece of art, then that's a bad thing. So then that just dismissed that person's experience, their experiences in this drawing. You know, we want to let them see that all their experiences, whether it's on paper, whether it's verbally, has value and worth, regardless of what it says or not says.
So I know with my clients, my adult clients, I talk a lot about self-care and the importance of that and the impacts it can have. Uh, can you tell us about the impacts self-care can have for an adult caregiver of a child?
Self-care for an adult caregiver of a child who's grieving is paramount. Kids take their cues from their adult caregivers. And if that adult caregiver is not taking care of themselves, maybe very stressed, maybe not being able to express their emotion, that child picks up on that. And so what they're trying to then do is then they're going to try to caregive the caregiver, because they want to make sure that that person's okay, because then who else is going to take care of me? Again, they're egocentric. You know, I need to make sure this caregiver is there because my other parent just died, so I got to make sure this person's okay. When a parent starts doing better, and this is the funny thing about parents, is they are so adamant on wanting helping their child, and they want to get them into a group. They want to, whatever they can do to help the child. But then when we step them back and say, what have you been doing for yourself? They're like, oh, my child's the focus. I'm like, yeah, and they're stressed out because you're stressed out. So the more that you can step back and take care of yourself and maybe go to the therapy yourself, or maybe doing some of the art activities with grief, any of those things that can help decrease some of your stress level, your anxieties, helps support your grief, in turn then helps them, because then not only do they have more capacity to be there for their kids, they're modeling healthy grief to their kids.
And kids learn how to react and cope with the world based on how the adults around them react. And so seeing an adult have a healthy response is really good for a child.
Right. And it's okay. A lot of parents feel they're trying to protect their child. They don't want to scare them with their emotion. While a child is not feeling the exact emotion that I am, their emotional intensity is high for them. They need to learn how to handle intense emotions. And if their caregiver is not demonstrating that to them or letting them be part of that process, not that we're saying that you have to unload on your kids. That's definitely not what we're saying. What we're saying is that you need to take care of yourself and show that you are able to do that, and demonstrate to a child that, yes, I'm crying, I miss daddy, and it's going to be okay, right? That's what we were needing to help them work through, is how do I get to a point where I'm believing that and that I'm doing better, then they trust that if they grieve or if they let go of those emotions, it'll be okay too, because mom or dad are showing me that, or grandma, grandpa, who's ever my caregiver. But yeah, certainly don't hear that we want an adult to use their child as their therapist. That's not what we're talking about. It's just showing them that it's okay to cry, it's okay to be upset, it's okay to be angry. Maybe You have a parent that just snapped. They just are at their last nerve, and that kid knows how to push the button, and the parent snaps and yells at him. If they have the wherewithal to kind of take a step back and say, I'm sorry I yelled at you. I'm just frustrated because daddy used to do this and I don't know how to do it and I'm frustrated. Then the child can start to understand where that came from and things start making more sense, and the anxiety in the room starts to decrease.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about is magical thinking. Can you tell us what that is and how it might impact a child?
Magical thinking is in very young children, where they believe they have the power to make things happen. An example is, I went to sleep and the toy went away, because I didn't want it to be there anymore. And maybe it was just because my caregiver put it away, but they believed that they had the thought that they could do it. Where it comes into play, especially in grief, that can be problematic is, let's say, and I had a child that this happened to, mom jokingly kept saying, you're going to be the death of me. And then mom died. That child really believed that he was the death of his mom because his mom said that to him, and he felt that he had the power for that. And young children believe those kind of things. They believe that they have the power. If I only would have done this, that wouldn't have happened. So it's what we try to do with that is we don't try to take that away from them. How they feel is how they feel. So in that instance with that child, it's understandable you would feel that way. And your mom had cancer. And the cancer is what killed your mom. So it's allowing them to have the feeling or emotion or what their belief is, and then giving them the alternate perspective so that they can see that, oh, okay. And it takes a while for those kinds of things to sink in, but we always, a catchphrase that we always use with kids is, and So we'll reflect back what the child told us. It's my fault. It's understandable you would think that because, your mom had said that. And, mom had cancer and she was very sick and her body just couldn't take anymore. Or whatever the thing is, that how they told the child that the loved one had died. Yeah. But we try to be very clear. That's another thing with kids that a lot of people caregivers, because again, they're trying to protect the child. They don't want them to know how the person died. And maybe there are details that the child doesn't need to know, but using euphemisms like gone to sleep, gone away, gone to heaven, are very confusing for young children because they're very concrete thinkers. And that kind of well-meaning is really hard for a child because they already have a hard time with the concept of death because they don't understand it, depending on their age, whether it's object permanency, if they understand that this is permanent. But in saying, let's say, well, we're talking about a pet that dies. Well, we had to put him to sleep. Well, think about a young child, and if you don't explain more of that, child's going to say, well, are you going to put me to sleep and then I go away? They don't understand those euphemisms. And so the more that we can be comfortable about talking about death and dying, the more a child is comfortable and is going, oh, okay, so this means they don't come back, or this means I can go to sleep and nothing will happen. That's not what happens here. So giving them adequate information for their developmental level is what we really try to coach parents on doing. A lot of times they ask us, should we tell the child that the mom is sick or grandma's sick or whatever? You know your child best. Here's what we know about kids. And so we give them that information so that they can decide what's best. They'll ask us, should we let them go to the funeral? You know your kid best. However, here's what we know that kids need. They need inclusion. They need to be around their caregivers that protect them and help them feel safe. Being excluded from that increases their anxiety. So then how could we do this in a way that the parent gets to go and not have to worry about the child, and the child is being caregiven in that respect. So we just try to help them navigate that. We never tell them how to do it, but we give them resources in terms of the education about here's what kids typically need. William Worden's Hallmark book on death of a parent was great about talking about the bereavement needs of children. I mean, one of the very first works that did that. But that's what we try to do, is help parents understand those bereavement needs, and then how to help them provide those needs in a way that's right for their family, their circumstances, because it's not a one size fits all. And again, they know their child best. So we always want to defer to the parent for that and support them in whatever decision that they make.
And talking about a book that's helpful, there's a lot of good resources out there. And when I post this, I'll be sure to put a link or a list of resources that might be helpful for people. It'll be there on the blog when I post this video. And it's good to know that this stuff is hard. It's difficult talking with a child about death and grief and COVID, and it's okay if you don't do it exactly right.
There's no such thing as right.
Right. So to me, the important thing is that you try. It's the intent, it's the effort you're putting in. So I think that pretty much wraps up everything that I was wanting to ask you about. One thing I do like to do at the end of all of these interviews is, and there may not be anything, but is there something good that can come out of COVID?
I don't feel comfortable with that phrasing.
Okay.
What I look at, and this relates to post-traumatic growth, and look at all the research in post-traumatic growth and grief. Not everybody experiences it, but we look at that there's opportunities for growth. In any loss, there's an opportunity for growth. So I think there are opportunities. There's opportunities for us to be able to connect in a different way, to slow down, to be more present, to be more mindful. What we're seeing with COVID is there's a lot more mindfulness practices going on, not just for adults, but for children, and seeing how that can really help them in school and help them concentrate better, help them cope better. So there's a lot of non-traditional things that are coming up on ways of how we're all coping with the uncertainty of the world. And I think that in and of itself can be really helpful, spending a different kind of time with our kids. I know so many parents, they struggle because both are working, kids are in school, they rarely get to see their kids, when they're awake. And this has allowed them some opportunities to spend more quality time, although some it's been a little bit too much. I mean, trying to navigate working from home and teaching from home has been an issue for a lot of families, and we get that. But it doesn't mean that it's all bad, not all good. But there are places where growth can happen, because we don't live in an isolated world where there's only sorrow or there's only joy. They coexist, and one happens to be higher than the other at any given moment. And sometimes, if we're lucky, they can be more balanced. But we try to look for that. Having a practice of gratitude kind of helps us to see that, to look at the things that we have in the moment that make us feel grateful. I think are what we're noticing more, those practices along with the mindfulness. Long way around the answer to your question.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate your perspective on that. And thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.